So I'm an economist, and I've was very happy to see over the past 40 years the incredible progress of women in the labor market. And that progress was largely fueled by women's increased participation in higher education. In most OECD countries, young women outnumber men in higher education 3 to 2. So here in this graph, we see that in Canada and in the United States, up to the late 1980s, there were more young men in higher education than young women. But then, instead of simply catching up to men, women began to overtake men. And it is this overtaking story that is the puzzle. Perhaps it's the case that after many decades of having difficulty in the school environment responded a little better to women's need. But was it the case that now boys who had long struggled with reading in school, were they really more into more difficulty? Is it, as the press most often writes about it, that boys are falling behind, not doing as well than before? Or are they actually left behind as girls really forge ahead and adopt identities of career women, whereas boys are not sure what to do? So in order to try to address this issue, we wanted to take the long view, look over many decades. We also wanted to focus on high school kids because to get into university, you need to have good grades in school. So we looked at 35 years of the Monitoring the Future data, which are US data. And so from 1975 to 2010 here, we see that on average, girls have long had better grade point average than boys, about 2.2 points on the 4-point scale. So this is not so much, just a difference between a B- and a B. However, what has changed over time is that there's been a disaffection with grading to the curve that we can see in these histograms. These histograms show the percentage of girls at the top and of boys at the bottom who are in the different categories. And what we see here is that in the 2000s, girls were most often likely to get an A. And boys, well, there was some increase, but not as much. So if we could focus simply on the A's, we see that in the 1990s, about 10% of girls were getting A's, and that percentage had gone to about 20% in the 2000s. So girls were really becoming really high achievers. Boys were not falling behind. There was really an increase in their good grades, but they were left behind by girls. So we wanted to try to find out what were some factors that may be motivating or maybe accounting for that change. And so one of the things we kind of looked at were the educational expectation or aspirations of these young people, here the high school seniors. And when we look at the students who say they will definitively want to attend grad school, here we see a tremendous raise among girls wanting to attend graduate school. About a quarter of girls in the 2000s say that they want to attend grad school. So this is very impressive. And I also want to say, when we look at people or young people who say that they definitely want to go to college, we find that even among 8th graders, we see this gender ratio. This 55-45 gender ratio is the dash line here, the green dash line. And beginning in 8th grade, girls have this idea of what they want to do. But then, when you think about it, a quarter of girls wanted to go to grad school. Do they know what's involved? Is there a sense that they want to achieve, what do they want to achieve from that? So we looked at the change in vocational expectation. That is, what do these people expect they will be doing when they will be age 30? And here we found some clues to our puzzle. We found that there had been a tremendous change over time, and that indeed in the 2000s, there were more than a quarter of girls who wanted to be professionals with a doctoral degree or equivalent, lawyers and so on, were in that categories. And that this was a big change over time, whereas among boys, the boys who had these change in aspirations were really not as large. So where was this coming from? Interestingly, it was coming from a very important decrease in the number of girls who aspired to be office workers. In the 1980s, 1 in 5 girls wanted to be a secretary or an office worker. And then in the 2000s, that was 1 in 40. It's a tremendous change that makes a lot of sense from a labor economist point of view, because essentially the demand for these occupations has declined tremendously over time with the increases in computers in the office and so on. Over that period of time, there was also some decline in the expectations of boys wanting to work in what we could call middle skill occupation, craftsmen and so on, but not to the same extent. So then we did a more detailed analysis to try to compare these change in plans for the future to other factors that had also changed over time. There was student behavior, the family environment, and work during school. Over that 35 years period, there had been changes in gender differences. And what we found is that the idea of plan for the future was the overwhelming factor that was explaining, for example, there is an excess of 6 percentage points in the number of girls who are earning A's, and about a third of that was actually accounted by the gender differences in these plans for the future. And also, importantly, this was also happening among our 8th graders. So our 8th graders here, we had better measures of student behavior, which included misbehavior having been sent to the office the year prior and so on. And so here, sure enough, we could explain some of the excess girl in the A's with these plans for the future at about the same percentage. But some part of the D's, the excess of boys in the C's and the D's, was also explained by student misbehavior. So these were very interesting findings that we're going to probe by going at lower level schools. And this was done with observational data. As economists, when we want to take the long view, we go to observational data. But I want to say that these findings have been corroborated in some experimental research, this one in particular conducted by SRDC, where they had some experimental intervention trying to improve access to post-secondary education. And they did find much larger differences, much larger impact of their intervention for boys and for girls. Essentially, the girls were already on track. So the big question, why should we care about this new gender imbalance in higher education? It shouldn't be, as we say in French, juste le retour des choses, a proper reversal of roles. Well, let's adopt different perspective as we're now doing in the context of CFAR. Let's think of the economist. The economists will care about the misallocation of resources that could be due to misinformation. Perhaps the young boys are unaware of the wages and employment opportunity in the mid-skill occupations. Perhaps the young women are unaware of the high demand of the professions that they want to embrace. So that could create some skill mismatch. Let's now think about a demographer. The demographer may be concerned about marriage markets. With less men getting a college education, more college-educated women will marry men with lower level of education. This might leave less educated women unmarried and raising families in more difficult circumstances. Now, the sociologists may care about the change in the balance of power in the family. And so this is from Canadian data, actually, and from the work of Marianne Bertrand and co-author, where she shows that when the wife shares of total family income exceeds 1/2, there is an increased risk of divorce. So really kind of interesting issues here. Will wives want to curtail their hours in the labor market to reduce their hours and avoid overtaking their husband's earning? All kinds of very interesting questions. And finally, for the parents may be concerned that their girls are going to be perhaps stretched out between the demands of the career and the demand of the family. The parents of boys may be concerned about boys spending too much time playing video games and so on, as the male picture suggests, whereas they would like to see their boy becoming businessmen and so on. So these are all very important questions, and especially I think the questions of the role of video gaming is one that I will want to address in future research. However, all of this is not so dire because when we look at happiness, all things considered, here it's from a 3-point scale, we see that over time, basically the gender gap in happiness has reversed, and the boys are relatively more happy than the girls. So I will conclude with this. Thank you very much.